Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming for a very special SPAAM seminar today. We're delighted to be joined by Dr. Radu Cimpeanu. I always get the name wrong. I'm so sorry.
I'll live that way.
And he'll be talking about talking the talk and to give a short survival guide on giving and receiving scientific presentations. So hopefully it looks to be quite a practical session, but give it away, Radu.
Yeah, thank you very much. I come with warnings. The first of which is that my talks are interactive and you shall be a captive audience to a certain extent. I also expect you to do stuff or at least have fun with me, because this is much nicer if I actually get to answer the questions and we sort out through the topics that you actually want to talk about. But otherwise, I think it's important to sort of ponder this question philosophically first. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we interested in presentation? What's their purpose beyond my supervisor sent me to give a talk, or I need to do this because I have a job interview? What do I actually want to convey and how? And I think it's important to know that it's not that prescriptive of a process. I don't want to tell you what to do, and I don't want you to think that there's a magical recipe in this world that if you follow steps like in an algorithm, that will be the recipe for a perfect talk. I think that the point of this, if you take nothing else away from it, is basically that this is more of a finding of a framework that lets you expand on your own personality and project the best version of yourselves. And it's very much an iterative process, like through practice, through kind of innovating in your own style, you'll come up with a version that you're most comfortable with and most happy to deliver. And I think that's an important point. So with this in mind, I'm going to do this from the perspective of having to give a bunch of talks every year. Some of you know I've been on sabbatical. So this year, like 2025, I think I'm counting about 16 or 17 talks, and it's not even halfway through. And because I go to conferences a fair bit, I listen to what will be an order of magnitude about more talks. And you can learn from giving talks, and you can learn from also being in the audience. And that's one of the other important points. The other one is we do training, like many of the staff members in the department, from yourselves, like I've just heard you had a nice SPAAM session on scientific communication, to colleagues who are early career searchers or senior folks. We do have training sessions. For example, we had one a few months ago, a half a day on how to come up with nicely written stories for the public when you get invited by a magazine or something like that to write a scientific output story. And in general, we do, work with the media and do all sorts of other things. So it is a continual learning process. I try, whenever I attend one of these, to learn one new trick every time and try to use it for all subsequent presentations, which I think is a good practice. And Warwick and in general, the university setting lets you do quite a few of these things. So many of you may have, for example, supervisors who get a lot involved in scientific communication. So there are science festivals like Pint of Science. We have offer holder open days, or kind of in general Warwick Uni school days where we get to talk to other folks who may want to get involved. I get involved often with summer schools or winter schools, which is good fun. So don't think of this as just being, I need to give a talk in a conference that's a 20-minute talk with 15 minutes plus 5-minute questions as being the only thing one can do. I think it's quite important to kind of span a bit of a range. Generally speaking, it's very nice to hear whenever someone comes back from a conference or a meeting or a workshop, and then as soon as you hear something cool, like this speaker particularly impressed me because they did that or that, it's nice to incorporate it as well. So do tell me if you hear something cool, is the subtle message there. So I think what I'm hoping that you'd gain out of this is through kind of basically honing in on your skills of how to actively listen, and then pondering your own practice and your own style to try to adapt some of these things in a way that suits your personality best. The way I think of this is mostly through a combination of, what's involved. There's a speaker, there's an audience, and there's a bunch of slides or a board or a medium of delivery through which content is delivered. So we can kind of take them one by one to a certain extent. Now, active audience moment number one. We're all applied mathematicians to a certain extent, I think, in this room, given the nature of the seminar series. I want you to tell me in 5 words what you do. So, for example, this should open up either if you go to the link on there, or if you do the QR code scan, it should take you to a nice little polling thing, which is just a free form text. And if I were to fill it in, I would say something like, scientific computing, fluid mechanics, numerical analysis, industrial maths, for example. It doesn't do expressions, it just does rows of words. So I'm just curious what, and folks online can join in, basically what you as a combination, as an audience, look like if you each independently consider your activity. And this will generate a word cloud, which I will seamlessly jump into, and hopefully magical things will appear whenever somebody responds. Don't think too hard. All of these are meant to be relatively quick and painless. There we go. I can probably guess who's answered first. So if we get maybe, yeah, there's what, a few of us in the room, a few folks online. Once we get maybe 5 or 6 answers in, this will hopefully start looking fun.
Multiple answers.
You can do, yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a gamble, to be fair, because depending on the nature of the audience, you can play games with these types of things. But if any of you would have worked in the same area, the words would have become larger and bolder. And what you'll notice here is not a single one of you has entered the same word twice. There we go. Someone went fun on the networks mouse. So cool. I'll deactivate this for a second and jump back here. So the idea that I wanted to convey with this was simply to suggest, even in a crowd of like-minded folks, you're all colleagues and friends, it actually took a while in gaming the system a little bit to find one common word between what you do. Now, imagine that you step foot in at a conference, at a workshop, whatever it is, and you walk into an audience with 50 other people from different institutions, different ages, different levels of experience. What is the likelihood that they will share your past, your literature reviews, your methodology experience? It may be a conference that has, for example, a very particular theme. So say you are invited because you are a specialist in this area, and you'll have specialists in that area with you. Or it may be a conference like, for example, the British Applied Maths Colloquium, which is essentially a free-for-all. Anyone can attend, anyone can go to any talk. You may not know, if you have a fan of your particular area method, that they will know the same bits of literature you know. So this is, yeah, just a point on heterogeneity, if you will. It's worth thinking about who your audience is, because even if in a group of friends, you may find that there's quite a big range that you all span. So yeah, because audiences are different and it is your responsibility to keep them there, my kind of take on this is as follows. In any room where you do this, you will likely share the space and the time with what will likely be a few tens of people who are all pretty clever, and who are all dedicating half an hour, say, of their time or an hour of their time to listening to what you have to say. So collectively, you will spend, say, 50 hours together, 50 hours of top researcher time, sharing that moment. So I think it's nice from the speaker's perspective to prepare materials in a way that respects that attention span, that time, and kind of considers your own objectives for what you want to convey, but also the audience's objectives. And this will change from event to event and audience to audience. So that's why my strategy to do this, and I'm getting to a practicality point, how do you design a presentation or a style of slides and so on that can do something like this? I normally, after maybe 2 or so years of PhD, started developing what I would call a master deck of slides, which is just a fancy way of saying, once you accumulate enough work, enough material that spans, say, your own project, or maybe 2 or 3 variations around it, it's nice to keep them all in one place, even if it becomes a bit bloated. You will never really present the master deck of slides. It's just a point source of material that then you build other types of presentations from. They can be, for example, if you think of like 3-minute thesis competitions, think of the scenario, you come to the office for a first time after a long holiday, and then you just find out that your supervisor had their best collaborator in place. You get to have a coffee with them, they draw you in, and you have 3 minutes to present what you do. Then it's nice if you have a 1-slide or a 2-slide version of, hi, this is me, and this is what I'm up to, and I'm awesome. And this is not requiring a lot of kind of prep and a lot of diligence every time. Like, it's nice to just have this in place, and I tend to renew it, once every year or two, depending on what stage you are in your project, because it's likely going to be different year 1, year 2, year 3 of your PhD. But have this in mind, because there will be opportunities, elevator pitch style, to have the mini summary of what you do. Then many conferences I go to have 10-minute talks. There tend to be 10 plus 2. And that means that they're good for sound bites, a bit of methodology, but not going into proofs and deep results, but enough to showcase why we're doing this, how we're doing this, what we've done, and what happens next. That's pretty much the 4 sets of answers you can probably go through. The most typical mathematical one I know, and maybe there's variations around the numbers, but quite often we tend to do 20, 25-minute talks. So that gives you a chance to do a bit of a deep dive and kind of flex your muscles in terms of a bit of maths, computer science, statistics, whatever the topic is. And when you go through the methodology or the results, you can do so with a bit of depth, not only with the highlights, but with a bit of everything else. And finally, there's long 1-hour talks like this one, which, if you're not careful, tend to become boring because 1 hour is a hell of a long time. So to display this fine structure in terms of cats, the master deck looks like a whole bunch of cats, and it's mayhem, and that's not something you want anywhere near your house. I like cats, but those are too many cats, even for me. The typical 10-minute 25 plus 5 are a nice selection of cute cats that do kind of sort of what you want them to do, but they're cats, so it's not going to be perfect, and that's fine. Then if you do the 1-hour version, that can, be, you need to be careful that you treat folks' attention with respect and kind of make sure that you structure it in the right way to be constructive. And the short version is more like, this is my favorite cat. This is the thing you need to see. Look, everyone, this is awesome in 1 minute. That's pretty much it. But it's important, like, I tend to draw all of them pretty much from one folder or one file. Having this structure in place and kind of iterating it has been helpful just to make sure that that I don't give the same talk twice, nor do I have to build every talk from scratch. It allowed me to mix and match, and quite often, when I finish a project or a paper or something, I take 5, 10 slides from it, add them to the master deck, and depending on where I go, I then tailor a talk in order to fit the audience in question. So for example, if I go talk to a group of, in my case, fluid mechanics folks, I'll, expand quite a bit on the experimental data, on the methodologies, and maybe a bit on the maths involved. If I go to a group that specializes in numerical analysis, I'll talk more about code convergence, numerical setup, things like that, and briefly motivate the results with why we're interested in the problem. So the point is, it allows you to sort of tailor the content a bit to who you're speaking with. My advice is kind of whenever we do seminar series, it's quite often the case that you like what you hear because folks get invited because they're, specialists in the area, they're nice and they have something cool to say. And in which case I encourage you to take notes. And if they've done something nice that you've enjoyed, see if you can come up with your own version of that. Not necessarily copy paste the exact same style, but basically see, I like this because of that reason. Can I do something similar that would kind of fit the bill for my presentation style? And you can do the same if you don't like it. Like, for example, if there's a talk that you really didn't enjoy and you got bored within 2 minutes for whatever reason, you can think, well, what have they done that really kind of made me kind of go in pondering in meditational mode very soon? Let me be careful not to do that. Classical example would be to have walls of text, for example. If you have just a massive slide that's pretty much just a narrative with 20-line paragraphs, it's quite difficult to keep one's attention to it. And the other tip I have, if you want to kind of play this game in a fun way, is for a BAMC type conference, for a general enough meeting in, say, applied mathematics or similar, it's nice to go to all the sessions where you have a vested interest in. If you're presenting in a session, it's respectful to stay for the full session usually. And if there are related sessions that your collaborators are in or the mini symposium and so on, it's nice to go. But quite often there will be a Wednesday afternoon session at some point in which you look at the schedule and you're like, there's nothing interesting there. And that's the perfect time for me, at least, to go to a session I would normally never go to. So for example, in fluid mechanics, I quite often like to go for the robotics sessions, or occasionally I go for the machine learning and AI type sessions. Not because I do that much of that on my own, but it's interesting to see and hear what they're up to. And quite often those are the areas where if you're looking at presentation tips and tricks, they may have their own tricks up their sleeves that are not in your own community, because we echo chamber quite a bit. We tend to go to the same type of talks from the same type of people, and we see the same type of content. And it's easy to see, to go ahead and say something like, well, it looks like everyone in this area is giving talks in the same way. Why don't I do the same? I think that's a recipe for kind of blending in with the crowd a bit too much. If you jump to other crowds on occasion, it's nice to see what they do that's innovative and cool to adopt. So yeah, those are a few thoughts on kind of that side of things. Please stop me if you have questions, because I've been chatting too much and you haven't. And I will have exercises for you every time, but if any of these led to any questions, I'm happy to be interrupted. I'll try to monitor the chat, but if someone helps, that might, yeah. Cool. Any thoughts, any questions? We can, of course, keep them for the end as well, but since we have them.
So with this whole idea of a master deck,
yeah,
often whenever I've given presentations, yeah, I find myself making slight variations for, like, whilst it's most of the same talk, I make slight variations depending on like who the audience is, for example, and things like that. Do you have like slides in your master deck which are essentially say the same thing, but to different people?
No, I think I would have different contents in my case, because what I do is quite interdisciplinary. I would have pretty much what you could see as a maths-oriented subset, a physics one, an engineering one, a computation, and a computer science one, and they would be distinct slides. And I would pretty much think of them as, I think most of my presentations will have a bit of each, but then that would only cover, say, 50% of the content. And to go from 50 to 100%, I would augment the relevant side of them to cater for the community in question. Or in other words, yeah, it's kind of the example that I mentioned, where if I know that the folks have summoned me to talk about the algorithm more, I'll leave some of the, say, image acquisition stuff behind, which in no way overlaps with the content that the audience was interested in, if I think that is the case, and instead talk about convergence studies and kind of issues with code robustness and the GitHub repos and stuff like that.
Okay, so it's not so much the talking about the same thing in a different way.
No,
it's just
yeah.
Don't mention some things or maybe
exactly.
one line, but really focus on other stuff. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show you, I mean, at the end, once we finish these, because actually I don't have that many slides. That's another trick. Don't make too many slides. Normally it's much nicer if it's in discussion mode. I think in total I have 5 slides for each section, which is why I encourage you to ask me stuff anyway. But I have brought along the presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago, which differs in both style and medium and so on from this one, of course, because they serve very different purposes. And in that one, I'll show you how I use menus and buttons and stuff. And for example, I can easily jump between sections, even if I keep more slides than I need without even the audience noticing that they're there. So yeah, but there are genuinely different bits of content. Yeah. Cool. Anyone else? Please on. I mean, you can choose your own adventure depending on how disciplined you are with your foldering structure. For me, I found that I keep one per subject area. Like, for example, drop dynamics for me, the subject area, liquid films is another subject area, knowledge transfer and industrial maths is another subject area. So I will have 3 master ones. And then it's unlikely that I need to cross combine between them. So as long as you find your units, that's fine. Quite often, if you're kind of building towards your PhD, the hope is that you'd have a unifying theme, and it all kind of falls in the same, under the same broad subject, even though it's variations or different sub-projects. This normally starts happening once, for example, if you go into a postdoc or you kind of move to a research center and you start a completely new body of work, then I think that's cause for starting a new master deck. And the same goes, I mean, I'm hoping that most of what I say here has some way to be adapted to other settings that are not academic as well. Because many of you will end up working in, say, R&D in companies, or may work with policy bodies and will have to advise other folks that will need to give presentations for. So the idea, many of these are hopefully transferable in other settings with a bit of creativity. But yeah, I think once you change jobs or you change topics or you change institutions and it's a vastly new place, you can then open a new can of worms or bunch of cats. Cool. I'll jump to the next one then. The presenter. Almost everyone's favorite part. I have the other exercise for you, which is, I'll need to activate it if you'll give me 1 sec. So I want you to have a think of how much of your attention span in this particular case went to me. But generally speaking, if you reflect on any SPAAM talk, when it's starting to be activated, if not, I'll just do it from here because it might be easier. New. Yep. So if you go to the exact same link or this exact same QR code from before, this is going to be the same for all exercises. I've asked you here, if you think of your entire attention span, and I'll make this a bit smaller so that we all see it. Yeah. How much of it is pondering life and its meaning? How much of it is thinking of the sunny day ahead? Very good. I've got 3 answers so far. I usually stop when I get 5 or 6. So you reckon, yeah, on average, 20 to 40%. Good. Now, in advanced mode, this question can also be asked as, which part of your attention span goes to what I'm waving about, what I'm talking about, versus what's on the board? So this is the next bit of this, which is kind of going more into the theory behind how to deliver messages and content. And this was from one of those training workshops I mentioned, where the 3 V's are a kind of common way of formulating these things. They stand for vocal, visual, and verbal. And it turns out that only 7% of the attention span, 7% of that 20 to 40% you hinted to on the previous question, go to the actual words I'm saying or that are on the slide. I imagine that you put a lot of effort into preparing those words and what is in there. And most people focus on the tone of your voice, the awkward silences, the kind of continuous waving movements, what we do on the board, how we write things, and so on. So it is worth, I think, strategizing a bit when you do deliver talks. Folks do genuinely follow kind of rhythm and voice type related things. If someone speaks in a very monotonic way, it will be very difficult to follow them beyond 3-4 minutes. So yeah, hence strategic pauses, all sorts of voice modulation tricks. You can kind of think of these, even when you follow other media, like when you listen to a podcast, if you do podcasts, or follow something on YouTube or similar, and you think of it as a narrative, even if someone's just, playing a computer game or something like that. What keeps you captivated? Why are you following that individual versus someone else? And you'll often find that variation in how they do things and a good mixture of, the type of media available is usually what draws people attention to it. So that's why, for example, when I give presentations, not necessarily of this type, this one has other types of interplay, but when I do, for example, interview talks or science ones, I tend to like to use the board at least for 5 minutes. I tend to like to ask questions of the audience for at least 5 minutes because that's when everyone's on their toes a little bit as well. So if it's just me talking, I have a limited level of faith in my ability to keep a room for 55 minutes straight. But if you get a bit involved, if you actually think about something, if you use those pauses to actually absorb a bit of the content, you tend to deliver a much punchier message. I think it's very much a case of less is more for this one. It's less about cramming a lot of content, a lot of words, and a lot of material, and more about how you deliver 3 or 4 key bits. I think this is the key idea here. Cool. So, it is important, of course, to kind of think about what context you're in when you're delivering said talk. What I often find is that in my own case, if I find something genuinely interesting, yes, I'll listen, but then I'll take my phone out And if this talk comes with the paper attached to it, I'll often go on archive and start looking through the paper as well. Or I'll check other outputs to see, like, for example, are any of the questions that I'm kind of thinking about already answered in a previous paper? If it's a long talk, it's quite easy to do this. I'm not advertising it as a good thing, but I'm using it as a sort of a prop just to indicate that while you're delivering the talk in our modern world, it's very likely folks will look into stuff. So, for example, if you keep a good website, if you keep a good archive page and so on, it'll give them something nice to look at. So when I give presentation style talks, whenever I have content that pertains to a paper that's been published, I tend to put the details of the paper and the QR code attached to it up there. Or if there's a source code that I want to present or something like that. In that case, if someone genuinely wants to look at stuff, I'll try to be captivating enough as I am, but just in case a bit of consolidation is needed, at least the attention is steered strategically in a given direction. And this is the way to procrastinate, because you can overdo this and not get to the substance of what you want to do. But I think for minimal, relating this to many of your CDT level activities of maintaining a clean web page and all of that, I think there is a role to it, and I quite like it. So the other bit at the bottom is when you do attend the conference, it's nice, you're likely going to have an audience that's a combination of folks who are genuinely interested in what you want to say because it's their subject area. So they're scientifically curious, or they want to snoop a little bit to see what other groups are up to. You'll probably have friends and colleagues who are there to support you, especially if they're one of your first talks. It's nice to kind of go along. And there'll be folks who kind of randomly walk in the room in the style that I mentioned before of me just going to a session because I haven't heard anything about that topic and it's cool. So when you do this, in order to kind of make the most of the audience, it's important to prepare the material and have your nice 20-minute stint, but it's also nice to advertise a bit and then kind of reflect on it. So quite often, if I go to a conference, I'll prepare a little LinkedIn post, or it used to be X, but I'm not using it as much anymore, or it used to be other media that will betray my age and I don't want to say them out loud. But the point is, I was telling people about things similar to, for example, how you advertise this session on Instagram, from what I understand, or other media. It's nice to kind of, even as you go to conferences, to go ahead and advertise them a little bit. Or if you haven't done it, or even if you have, to then kind of have with a picture or so, mention that you've done it, because then people know that you talk about this topic and they'll come to the next one. So this thing with say what you want to say, then say it, then say you said it, is the policy of the Federal Reserve of the United States for changing monetary policies and rates at the moment, because this is the smoothest, easiest kind of soft landing mode in which you don't surprise the markets if you do something. But yeah, in scientific talk speak, it's simply, if you just rely on the spontaneity of the audience to be there, sometimes you may be disappointed. Whereas if you prepare the terrain a bit and then use these types of things to advertise that you've done something, it'll snowball into other things. And then I found that, yeah, if you belong to a larger research group or you have colleagues with which you share some bodies of work, and the two of you, for example, are giving different talks on different days, it's nice if the first person advertises that there's going to be a related piece of work being talked about later. Sometimes I do this with collaborators as well. So if something I know is related, or they're genuinely kind of similar work packages, it'll give a sense of continuity. If someone enjoyed it, they'll know what to do next. If you don't have that level of kind of relationship with the larger research group, then this is fine. But if you do, it can be used strategically. I think that's the only point. Cool. Any questions about any of this stuff before I jump to the next bit? I will use awkward silence to my have a think. You'll have time at the end as well. Cool. And then we can jump then to, the actual talk, the actual slides, the materials that you present. So final exercise for you. Again, let me jump in and prepare it before you jump into it. I switched the other one off. So some of you may have drifted away. How many minutes do you reckon that was? Just out of curiosity. It's a free-form text. You can write anything in numbers or letters. Doesn't really matter. I'll stop sharing for a sec. Same, oops. I'll still share. I'll just need to get out of the slide deck. to go online. This is more my personal curiosity. About 20, okay. Not a bad start. 6 minutes is more what I would have expected. Cool. So in that case, since, yeah, there's obviously a variety of answers, and that was very much the point, I'll stop it there. I want you to kind of have a bit of a 30-second thought process as to when that happened. When was the first time you drifted away? Why did you drift away? And if you did come back, why you came back? Was it a burst of color? Was me waving about? Was it a change in tone? The reason I ask you this is that you can then project outwards and have a think, if I'm delivering a talk and I notice that the audience either slipping away, what can I do? Bring them back to me. So it'll be different for different folks, for different audiences. And that's why I think the personalization of this to your own style and your own event will be important. But I think as a framework, it's important to reflect on these points and kind of use them to your advantage. So with that in mind, I will preempt this by saying everything I tell you here is a matter of opinion. These are not fixed rules, and I tend to be fussy about certain things. So take that with a pinch of salt. But it's okay to have opinions about certain things sometimes, and I'm sure you may develop your own if you don't have them already. So, with said pinch of salt, I am personally not a huge fan of the standard Beamer template. I think I may have moaned about this on occasion in lectures as well, but I thought that because it's been used quite a lot in in math conferences throughout, I have been to sessions where you've seen 12 different talks delivered in the exact same template. And it's even difficult for me to dissociate them. And sure, if it's a one-off, like you have other stuff happening during the day, you go to a talk, it's on this type of slide deck, and then you go and do other stuff, it's fantastic. But if you go to a conference and you listen to 20 talks or 30 talks and they all look the same, even if the content is different and engaging, you'll have fatigue by that point. So this is my subtle encouragement to color outside the lines a bit. Have your own Beamer template. Do them in PowerPoint sometimes. So all my maths talks, I do them in Beamer, and I can show you a slide deck in a second. Many of my outreach ones, or the ones that involve a bit more vivid color, audience interaction things, I do them in PowerPoint because I think it's easier and it's more fun to do. But I don't think it's sort of like you're all young, and I don't think you need to be entrenched enough to have a position of the type, I'll only make slides in Beamer, or I'll only make slides in Canva, or PowerPoint is the best. Like, sure, they can probably do some things better than others, but so can you in adapting them to your needs. Similar to how, for example, I don't think that one programming language is the best. Each of them is good for certain things, and if you kind of use them strategically, it's better. So yeah, but yeah, I definitely have an encouragement not to use the standard one if at all possible, because it'll kind of make your talk stand out from the crowd, which is the purpose of it. Cool. Then introductory slides is another one. Like, is it worth having one of those slides that has an outline with all the sections and all of that type of stuff? Maybe show of hands in the room, and online you can practice at home. Do you have and do you like an introductory slide? If yes, please raise a hand. Yeah, mixed opinions. My answer to this is it depends. If it's a 1-hour talk, I think giving the folks a sense of structure is helpful. And if they only came here for a particular sub-project or a particular technique, they'll roughly know that it is and when it is coming, which is a good thing to have. If it's a 10-minute talk and you waste 2 minutes going through section 1 will do this, section 2 will do that, it's perhaps a less good use of one's time. So kind of you have to adapt it to the method. I tended to use them less and less. I used to like them at the beginning, but then I found that it kind of beyond giving you kind of a space of personal comfort, because it's nice, you know the setup already and it's giving you a bit of a warm-up. I think that's the only good purpose it serves for me at this point. If I already know what I have to say, I'll usually just get into it. Cool. I tend to think in terms of, should I have too many words or not? Should I have too many lines or not? You may have maximum word rules. I've seen some of these for presentations. Honestly, it doesn't matter too much. I do think you have to have a variety between words, images, videos, formulae whenever possible. It's not really a strict rule, but I think it's a good thing to have in mind not to have too many words on a slide, like this one will end up, for example, but I have pauses. Finally, text shadowing. This is another popular one for Beamer users. I don't like it that much because if I put text in almost hidden mode, the only purpose it serves, you're not listening to me now, you're reading what's there. So similar to kind of how it is in other formulae, you're kind of trying to anticipate what's ahead and kind of jumping straight to the content and ignoring the speaker. So for me, that and having slide counters, by which I mean the bit up top there, if it were to say slide 8 out of 59, you would be worried by now. If it said slide 8 out of 9, my hopeful reaction would be, oh, and so on and so forth. But that would distract you from the actual thing that I'm saying. So for example, in my own LaTeX slides, instead of saying 8 out of something, I just put end at the end. And when the end will come, you'll be surprised, and that's a happy thing. But basically, I think it's useful to direct the audience's attention to what you're interested in, and that's not anticipatory reading or kind of slide counting. Yeah, and every now and then you can have a bit of fun. I use questions for these, but every now and then you can throw in a fun little image, movie. I use bad puns to my advantage when I can, stuff like that. Find your own personality. I think use of kind of humor and so on is a very personal thing. That's why I don't think of this as being a recipe, like you need to do something specific to. No, I think each of you will have a particular style, and it's great. Many of you know some of my students, and I've seen 3 or 4 very different delivery styles, and they all enjoy it by now, and I think they're doing a good job in very different ways. So yeah. Finally, in terms of colors, I think I quite like chromatics and color usage, and I think it's nice to kind of gain an appreciation for it, not because it just looks neat. Like, for example, I went through efforts to make my aubergine color match the Warwick scheme and so on and so forth. And I know this makes me sleep better at night, but not a lot of other people. But there is a genuine reason to take this into account because many folks in the audience may be colorblind. Or many types of data may be much better visualized if presented in a certain way. So I've prepped for you, and obviously if you're interested, I can send you the exact links. But I have 3 tabs open here on 3 websites I quite like about the use of color. So for example, this is from an instrument scientist in atom physics. And they talk about introductions to color schemes, how to deploy them strategically, how certain colors mix well with others, and so on and so forth, which then you can devise to create your own color setup. This one's nice because it shows you if you kind of have a certain color combination in mind, can you design it in a way that's mindful of folks' color blindness so that you can then devise kind of much more visible, more accessible slides. And this is one that puts together thoughts on, depending on what type of data you have, how would be best to present it in terms of, sequential to categorical, discrete versus gradient type schemes. So in my own research group, I get to annoy my students with kind of one post of this type every 2-3 months where we kind of ponder the nature of how to plot stuff and why and so on and so forth. I think, like with many things, you can take them to logical extremes and it's not useful. Like there's a curve of diminishing returns, but up to a point, like genuinely being respectful of color blindness issues or making your plots visible, I think that's a nice thing to take into account. So I quite like it. Now I think I'll have to go, through some of these in quick mode now. Cool. Demos. Some of you may remember the recent introduction of BARD and how successfully it managed to misfire on some fairly basic astrophysics questions, I think. Demos are great, but I'm sure each of you can think of 2 or 3 high-profile demos in the tech world that did not go well. So my thought on demos or live coding and stuff like that is generally that if it works well and it's short and compact, it can be really convincing. But if it becomes a distraction, it takes long and it doesn't work anymore, and you get, I don't know, stuff that's dependent on the internet being there and the internet disappears, then it becomes a bit of a kind of deflating moment in the talk. So as long as it's easy to embed and do, I'm all for it because, again, it can set your material apart. But if it has potential for sparks to fly for other reasons, I stop it. So an easy example of this is There's a contentious topic on, for example, embedding videos in Beamer and LaTeX. Because sometimes if you have to send your talk to a different computer, they may not work. So the way I came across a solution for that was something like, instead of embedding them directly, create buttons, and those buttons play the movies in the local movie player. So then if I send my talk to a Windows machine, a Mac, or Linux, as long as it has a video player, and most of them do, although one didn't at some point. I went to a computer in a company that had a particularly challenging confidentiality and privacy policy, and for security purposes, they did not have a single video player. That's when I had to be a bit agile. But 99.9% of the time, something like that will work. And yeah, it's just nice to be mindful that there may not be a connector in the room that fits you. There may not be something like that. So you still want your talk to work well and to be polished. So you can sometimes think about these things. Usually they come with, when something didn't work once, then you get to fix it for the next time. But if you can anticipate one or two, it's even better. Cool. Yeah, the bit where you add a bit of variation to your notes, I think it's nice that you can actually use the 3 Vs from before to your advantage. You can practice. I know many of you do so in various common rooms and so on. We do research group presentation sessions together and give one another feedback. So, you know, that you can all use as practice to kind of hone in on these skills. Everyone's still learning. I still do talks quite differently from one another. So that's good. And yeah, I think ultimately you'll need to find your special sauce. Imagine you're at a conference, you're there for 4 or 5 days, you'll see a whole bunch of talks, and you want a week or two later for folks to remember what you said, even if it's 2 or 3 key messages. And they may remember it because you had a cute color theme or that you had a particularly cool plot that's memorable. They may remember it because it was a particularly elegant bit of math, or the way you debugged your algorithm was really cool, something like that. But it's nice to give a sense of particularity and something that actually sticks. And yeah, in terms of kind of continuing this, you know, I've seen many tricks in storytelling for scientists, like even creating characters that go through your research story, like presenting them from the perspective of you as a scientist doing something, not necessarily a raw sort of objective message is one way to do it. You know, if you think of your favorite Disney movie, for example, it looks very different from different characters' perspective. Similar to my talks, for example, I like to, for example, encourage the audience to think from the perspective of a droplet or a bubble. The world looks very different there. So it's nice to take a minute to think what the world looks like from a much different physical setup. Yeah, do your thing. I quite like, for example, using art in mind. Many of you have seen the little art gallery things I keep by my office or inside my office. They're watercolor paintings that a friend of mine does, and she's a very talented designer. I've seen variations of this where, yeah, some people like to wear really colorful shirts. That's their thing. Ultimately, it can be subtle, it can be less subtle, but it's nice to find your thing, because then folks will remember kind of a particular style, which helps. Yeah, the difficulty level one is, if you think of a linear progression through a difficulty level where you start small, you present the problem in a nice and fluffy way, and then you work through the maths and it gets more and more complicated, those minutes of the attention span I asked you about before will be much lower. Because quite often, unless you're a specialist, it'll be harder and harder to follow. And I think you'll lose more and more of the audience. So a normal kind of progression through a scientific talk needs to bring back the audience every now and then. That's why, for example, I structure these sometimes in acts 1, 2, and 3. And then each kind of can be another bringing back the audience point. But yeah, there will be times when you need to get into the weeds, particularly for longer talks, and that's perfect. But do make sure that you bring people out of the weeds at some point, and then they can at least be there with you for the final bit, for the key message, which I think is, you know, again, nice to be mindful of the audience and their time as well. Checkpoints, you know, ask questions. Ask questions of them, let them ask questions of you, this type of stuff. And yeah, in terms of graphics, I have the final challenge for you, speaking of questions. Tell me if you like this plot or not. I see no's. Yeah, I'm thinking the folks online are also thinking, no, this is not a good plot. Okay, shout at me, sequentially perhaps. What do you think is not good about this plot? One each.
Don't like labels.
No labels. Anything else? Ugly colors. The other subtler one is I intentionally picked the colors so that they're colorblind unfriendly for this demo. And also, if you print them, they're roughly the same shade of gray, which is quite often important when you prepare figures for papers and stuff. So how would you make it better? Yeah, not do a whole bunch of those other things. I'll show you how I looked at the plot like this. And by the way, this happens all the time. Like I have to review papers on a, every 2-week monthly basis. Every third one or so, I'll have plots that look exactly like this. No labels, no legend, no anything that kind of makes me understand what's going on. So yeah, this was the constructive criticism bit. How would I do this better? Well, one way to do it is, for example, using the grid behind it, using different styles for, the squares and the circle for different types of data, using color-friendly things, actually displaying the legend, having sufficiently large fonts. There's very few bugbears of mine that are bigger than not being able to see the information on the plot. So if it's done in a tiny font and you can't see what's happening, it almost becomes frustrating because there's some information in there, but you can't see it. Then my eyesight's reasonably okay. So yeah, just be mindful of size of the various things and the information for it to be sufficiently visible and different, even taking into account some of the subtler things like color blindness that I mentioned before. Yeah, and for example, if you want to highlight a particular place, you can highlight the particular place. So this plot obviously I made up just for illustrative purposes, but you can see how if your plot genuinely has more information in a given section, having a sort of inset of this type can be quite helpful. So I'm not saying this is a good plot by any means, but I'm just saying it's better than the previous one. And then if you ponder a bit how you can spot good or bad literature elements from your own experience, you can then build accordingly. Cool. So yeah, I think with many of you, you're working on so many different cool projects, different types of data. You get to have fun with this. You'll find, in the literature, certain ways of plotting things, but you may find a new way of plotting something that's relevant to your topic. Use it. Have a bit of fun. Cool. And yeah, I mentioned if we have time or if you feel like it, I can show you the talk I gave a couple of weeks ago. I'll jump onto it for a minute just so that you see some of the things I refer to. But otherwise, I think it's a good time to stop and ask a few questions or answer a few questions.